If you are hearing these words at the age of 70 or beyond, pause for just a very brief moment, just one moment, because there is a truth that is rarely spoken to you slowly and deeply enough. The fact that you are still here, still listening, is already something deeply worthy of respect. Not everyone makes it to this stretch of the road. Many people turned away earlier in years when they never had the chance to fully understand what their life had already carried. You have lived long enough to witness the world change again and again. Things that once felt obvious became unfamiliar. Things that seemed solid slowly faded. You have seen war and peace, scarcity and abundance, loss and recovery. There were things you once held tightly and later had to let go. There were things you believed would last forever, only to learn they were just a chapter. And through all of it, you are still here. Not by accident, not by chance. At a certain age, people often begin to ask, what do I have left? But perhaps the gentler question is, what have I lived through? Because simply living long enough to understand that life is not simple, not straight, not perfectly fair, this itself is a kind of wisdom. A wisdom that does not need to speak loudly. It shows itself in how you remain quiet over things no longer worth arguing about, in how you step back instead of trying to win, in how you choose peace over being right. Golden Leaf Path does not see old age as a narrowing of life. On the contrary, it can be the first time many people are truly allowed to slow down, to live more lightly, and to live more honestly as themselves. No need to prove anything, no need to chase, no need to accumulate more just to feel worthy. Simply being present is already enough. If these words touched you in a very quiet way, perhaps you are already walking this path, the path of golden leaves that do not rush to fall, but gently complete their cycle in calmness. And if you wish to continue walking alongside reflections like these, you may choose to subscribe to Golden Leaf Path, not to learn something new, but to have a place that gently reminds you making it this far already means your life is a story worth listening to. And when one has gone far enough to look back on their own journey, many people begin to notice something quietly surprising. The later years no longer ask us to gain more, but gently invite us to set things down. Not because we have lost the ability to accumulate, but because the heart has become full in a different way. For most of life, we are taught that happiness lies ahead, in having one more thing, reaching another milestone, holding on just a little longer. We gather possessions, roles, relationships, memories, even worries. Each had its purpose at a certain time. But when the hair has turned gray and the steps grow slower, we begin to see that not everything once necessary needs to be carried into this part of the road. Happiness in old age rarely arrives as a burst of joy. It comes quietly. Sometimes it is simply a room that feels less crowded, a morning with no rush, a conversation that does not require too much explanation. As excess is gently set aside, the heart becomes lighter, not because something is lost, but because we finally allow ourselves to live simply. Letting go does not mean rejecting the past. It is not denying what we have built. Here, letting go means no longer holding on to things that have already fulfilled their role. Some relationships exist only out of habit. Some worries are no longer needed. Some desires were shaped for a version of ourselves from many years ago. When we allow them to leave, what remains is not emptiness, but space to breathe. Golden Leaf Path believes that at this stage of life, happiness does not need to be chased. It appears when we stop carrying burdens that no longer belong to us, when we accept that we no longer need to prove anything to deserve peace. And perhaps that is one of the quietest gifts of old age, the ability to live with less, but more deeply, more lightly, but more honestly. If you are beginning to feel this, simply keep listening. There is no need to hurry. This path was never meant for hurried steps. And it is precisely in that moment when life begins to feel lighter that a very quiet temptation often appears. The thought that we already know enough, that there is nothing more to learn. This thought is not loud. It arrives gently, almost reasonably. After 70 years of living, it can feel natural to believe one has seen enough joy and sorrow, enough right and wrong, enough rise and fall, to no longer need to listen to anything new. But Golden Leaf Path believes this is not peace, it is a door closing too early. Not because older people lack understanding, but because when we believe there is nothing left to learn, we quietly stop being in conversation with life itself. Learning at this stage is no longer about memorizing, debating, or proving anything. It is a very gentle openness to simple things, a different perspective, a story from someone younger, a small change in the world around us. Those who keep their minds clear in later years are often not the ones who speak most about their experience. They listen more. Their curiosity is soft and kind. Not to argue, but to understand. Not to change others, but to allow themselves to still be living, not merely existing. When a person believes they are finished, the mind slowly begins to narrow. New things become annoying. Differences become wrong. And very gradually, very quietly, the world starts to feel distant. Not because it has changed too fast, but because we no longer take even a small step to keep pace with its breathing. Learning in old age is not a burden. It is a privilege. It is the ability to look at familiar things with gentler eyes. It is realizing that one can still change a little, understand a little more, and live a little more deeply than yesterday. Golden Leaf Path does not encourage you to learn anything specific. It simply hopes you will not close the door of curiosity in your heart. Because as long as we are willing to learn, we are still growing in a very human way. And when that learning happens quietly, without pressure, without comparison, it becomes a soft source of vitality, helping old age remain not rigid but fully ripened. If you feel that you still want to listen, still want to understand something more about this life, then perhaps your journey is still unfolding. And that alone is already a very beautiful sign. And when the mind is still soft enough to learn, light enough to release what is no longer needed, people begin to look at their relationships with different eyes. The question is no longer, who has been with me the longest, but who brings me peace when I am with them? At this age, time is no longer something to spend carelessly. Each day becomes clearer, more precious, and also more fragile. There are relationships that were once deeply important. There are people who have been part of our lives for many years, sometimes for a lifetime. But not all of them need to be carried into this stretch of the road. Some relationships over time no longer nourish us and quietly drain our energy instead. Conversations that leave a heavy feeling behind. Meetings that create more unease than comfort. Familiar words that consistently carry disregard, blame, or control. Letting go of toxic relationships is not an act of coldness. It is a very late honesty with oneself, not to punish anyone, not to prove anything, simply because there is no longer enough strength to live in spaces that lack respect and calm. At this age, you do not need more people to endure. You only need people who allow you to be yourself, whether in silence or in slowness, just as you are. Golden Leaf Path believes that late life maturity sometimes is not about holding on to everything, but about having the courage to set down a few familiar things that have become too heavy. When relationships that no longer fit are gently moved aside, inner space opens. And within that space, peace begins to return very quietly, but very real. If as you hear these words, someone comes to mind, a relationship you have been quietly enduring for too long, you do not need to explain anything. Simply leave the number 1 inch, the comments. Not to justify, just to remind yourself you deserve peace at this stage of your life. And when relationships that no longer fit have been gently set down, a quiet space begins to appear. That quiet is not empty, but it is enough for us to hear more clearly what has been filling our lives. At this point, many people begin to realize that not only people, but also possessions, memories, and thoughts can become burdens. They have been there for so long that we hardly notice them anymore, yet they quietly take up space in everyday life. Look around the space you are in now. There are objects that have not been used for years. Drawers kept just in case, even though deep down you know you no longer need what's inside. Each item carries a thin thread tying you to an older version of yourself. That is not wrong. But when too many are kept, the room feels crowded, and so does the heart. Clutter is not only physical, it also lives inside us. In things that happened long ago but are still replayed in silence. In words never spoken. In wounds that have passed but were never truly laid down. We tell ourselves we are used to them, that they no longer matter. Yet sometimes it is these familiar things that make us feel short of breath without knowing why. Letting go of clutter does not mean throwing everything away. It is a gentle choosing, keeping what still serves the present, setting down what remains only out of habit. When an object is given away, a memory is forgiven, or a thought is loosened, space opens up. And in that space, breathing becomes a little easier. Golden Leaf Path believes that at this stage of life, we do not need much to live well. Just enough room for morning light to enter. Enough space for a warm cup of tea. Enough room for quiet. When the home becomes simpler, the mind softens too. Not because life is less complex, but because we are no longer carrying everything at once. Some things were once very important, but have now completed their role. Allowing them to leave does not erase the past. On the contrary, it honors the past by not letting it overshadow the present. And when the clutter settles, a simple truth appears. Peace often comes after we clear space, not before. If you are in this season, just move slowly. There is no need to do much in one day. Each time you set down something no longer needed, you become a little lighter. And sometimes being just a little lighter is enough to make life feel gentle again. And when the inner space becomes less crowded, an old fear often shows itself more clearly: the fear of aging. It does not arrive as panic. It comes quietly hidden in casual remarks, in the way we avoid the mirror, in the small sense of loss, when the body no longer responds as quickly as it once did. Society has taught us that aging means loss of strength, loss of roles, loss of attention. But perhaps that is only a story told for so long that we forget we have the right to tell a different one. Aging is not a decline, it is a shift into a different rhythm. Slower but deeper, less noisy but clearer. Every wrinkle is not just a mark of time, but proof of having laughed, worried, and stood back up after difficult days. Every strand of gray hair is not a deficiency, but a reminder that we have traveled far enough to earn understanding. When we are young, we run to prove ourselves. When we grow older, we can stop to choose. Choose not to argue over what no longer matters. Choose not to strain ourselves to please everyone. Choose calm over winning. This freedom does not come from physical strength, but from accepting ourselves as we are. The fear of aging often comes from comparing ourselves to an earlier version, faster, stronger, more noticed. But Golden Leaf Path believes that comparison is unfair. The person you are today was not born to repeat the person you once were. You were born to complete a life cycle with the gentleness, maturity, and compassion that only time can give. When we stop fearing age, we stop running from the present. We begin to live in it. We listen to the body instead of blaming it. We allow ourselves to rest without guilt. We understand that our worth is not measured by how much we can do, but by how we are present in a quiet morning, a short conversation, a soft moment of gratitude. Aging seen this way is no longer something to avoid. It becomes a privilege to live long enough to release fear, keep what truly matters, and continue forward with a lighter heart. And when fear settles, freedom begins to bloom, not loudly but steadily, like a season fully ripened. And when the fear of aging has softened, another awareness begins to come into clearer view: no one can live your joy for you. For many years, we grow used to waiting for children to care a little more, waiting for friends to understand, waiting for recognition, for a visit, for someone to remember. That waiting is not wrong. It comes from love. But when it stretches on too long, it quietly turns into a burden. At this age, many people come to realize that when we place our happiness in someone else's hands, we also place our peace into things we cannot control. Other people have their own lives, their own busyness, their own worries, and they cannot always be there exactly when we need them. When we understand this, not with blame, but with gentleness, we begin to return happiness to where it truly belongs. Happiness is not being invited somewhere. It is not being remembered on every occasion. It is not having every expectation met. At this stage of life, happiness often arrives very simply: making a cup of tea just the way you like it, taking a slow walk in the cool afternoon air, opening a book you've read before even though you already know the ending. These joys do not need to be given by anyone else. They appear when we allow ourselves to care for our own inner life. Golden Leaf Path does not suggest that you must live alone or close yourself off from others. On the contrary, when we no longer expect others to make us happy, relationships become lighter. We meet because we want to, not because we need to. We talk to share, not to be filled. And in that lightness, affection often becomes more genuine. There is a quiet freedom in realizing that you do not need to wait for someone to arrive in order to begin a good day. You do not need permission to feel enough. You can create moments of calm for yourself, small but steady. And when these moments add up, they form a strong inner life. Happiness in old age is not loud. It does not need witnesses. It comes when we stop sending the question, "Who will make me happy?" outward, and turn instead to a gentler question: "What right now brings peace to my heart?" When that answer comes from within, life slows down but grows deeper. And in that depth, we no longer feel forgotten. We are exactly where we belong. And when happiness has been gently returned inward, another habit also needs to be set down just as softly: the habit of comparing oneself to those who are younger. This comparison is rarely spoken aloud. It appears when we see someone walking faster, doing more, receiving more attention. It whispers, "I used to be like that too." and then very quietly it plants an unnecessary sadness in the heart. Comparison is a natural human reflex, but at this stage of life, it no longer helps us move forward. It only pulls us back towards standards that no longer fit. The person you are today was not born to compete with youth. You are living on a different level of life, one where value is no longer measured by speed but by depth. The young have strength, older people have understanding. The young move forward. Older people can see the whole picture behind them. Each stage carries its own gift. When we use the measure of another stage to judge our present life, the result is always unfair. Not because we have become less, but because the measure itself is misplaced. Golden Leaf Path believes peace arrives when we stop asking, "Can I still do what I used to?" and begin asking, "What suits me now?" That might mean moving more slowly, speaking less, choosing to stay quiet instead of being visible. These are not signs of retreat. They are wise adjustments made by someone who has walked far enough to understand what their body and mind truly need. When we stop comparing ourselves to the young, we also stop blaming ourselves for new limits. We listen to the body instead of forcing it. We value each moment. We are still present even in silence. And in that valuing, self-respect is restored in a very natural way. There is no need to return to prove anything. No need to cling to the past to feel worthy. Your value does not come from resembling anyone else, but from being fully yourself, a version shaped and refined by time. When comparison fades, the heart expands. And in that space, we are able to live our remaining days with a calm that no earlier stage of life could offer. And when comparison has finally quieted, what often rises most clearly are regrets. Not grand regrets, but very human ones. A sentence never spoken. A decision delayed, someone not held on to, a moment allowed to pass. At this age, memories no longer line up neatly. They return unexpectedly, especially in quiet afternoons or restless nights. Regret itself is not wrong. It shows that we once cared. But when carried for too long, it becomes a heavy bag. We walk more slowly. We tire more easily. We live in the present, yet the mind keeps being pulled back to things that cannot be changed. The past no longer needs to be solved. It only needs to be set down. Many people believe that letting go of regret means denying what happened. In truth, it is the gentlest way to honor reality. We acknowledge this: we did the best we could with the understanding and circumstances we had at the time. No one passes through life without stumbling. No one walks a long road without collecting a few scratches. Those marks do not make us less, they make us real. Golden Leaf Path believes that at a certain age, the greatest courage is not doing more but forgiving oneself. Forgiving ourselves for having been afraid, for having chosen poorly, for not being strong enough at moments when we were still young and unformed. When that forgiveness happens quietly without announcement, the heart grows lighter. Regret likes to say, "If only," but the present whispers something else: there is still now. There is still a morning to wake more slowly, still a phone call to speak kindly, still a day to live more honestly with oneself. The time ahead may be shorter than the time behind, but it is not less valuable. In some ways, it is more precious because we now know what is not worth carrying anymore. When regret is set down, we stop punishing ourselves. We live the days that remain, not to fix the past, but to stop being harsh with ourselves. And in that gentleness, life does not become perfect, but it becomes livable. Enough to breathe, enough to smile, enough to know this: we no longer owe the past anything more. And when regret has been gently set down, what remains, perhaps the final and most important thing, is the belief that there is still time. Many people reach the later years of life not because they lack health, but because they lack faith. The belief that it is already too late, that the best parts are behind them, that from here on life is only repetition, shrinking, waiting. Yet the truth is quieter than that. Every morning you still wake up is still a beginning. Not a beginning to run faster or achieve more, but a beginning to live more in tune with your own rhythm. To speak less of what does not need to be said. To keep only what is still worth keeping. To be more fully present in very small moments: a peaceful meal, a short conversation, an unhurried afternoon. When we believe it is not too late, we stop living to compensate. We begin living through conscious choice. Looking back over the entire path you have walked, one thing becomes clear. Happiness in old age does not come from adding more, but from letting go. Letting go of outdated beliefs. Letting go of relationships that drain you. Letting go of clutter in the home and in the heart. Letting go of the fear of aging. Letting go of expecting others to make you happy. Letting go of comparison. Letting go of regret. And finally, letting go of the idea that your life has already closed. Golden Leaf Path believes that life after 70 is not an ending, but a chapter with the least noise and therefore the most truth. Here you do not need to prove anything. You only need to live in a way that leaves your heart a little more at peace than yesterday. If that happens, then everything else is already enough. If these reflections slow you down by just one breath, if you feel understood without needing to explain, you may gently express that connection with a like, or share this with others who are walking the same stretch of the road, so they too can find a place to pause. And if you wish to continue alongside Golden Leaf Path, a place that does not tell you how to live, but simply sits with you, as you look back, you may choose to subscribe. We will continue to offer slow, warm, and sincere videos like this. Thank you for spending your time here. Wishing you a peaceful evening, a gentle sleep, and the days ahead, though simple, still full in your own quiet way. We look forward to meeting you again in future videos on the Golden Leaf Path, where every step is respected.